Hey guys, Dr. Michael Young here. We are ready to start into our next chapter, Chapter 2. I think you're going to find Chapter 2 very interesting. Everyone can relate to this, values and attitudes. We're talking about how people, what values and attitudes they have, and to link this into what we talked about before, remember we said that organizational behavior. It's basically the study of how we make organizations more productive. And of course, this has to do with the individual. What organizational behavior hopes to do is tap into people's motivation, inspiration, productivity, engagement, and make them more productive. So, how would values and attitudes fit into this? Well, it's pretty simple. Your values and attitudes affect your motivation. They affect, what you plan to do, your behavior. They affect how much you identify with an organization. They're going to affect how hard you're going to work and what types of things you're going to work toward. So all of these things are important for organizational behavior. Just a definition: personal values, they're abstract. They're ideas that we have, or ideals that guide our thinking and thus our behavior across different situations. In a little bit, I'm going to talk about how I believe that values are changing very quickly, and this is influencing organizational behavior in very profound ways. I think that values are in the process right now of going through a very, very serious realignment, more so than we really understand, and it's happening pretty quickly. That's the reason we don't really have a handle on it yet. But anyway, let's move along and look at some of what some other people have to say about values. One guy that's famous about talking about values is this guy, Schwartz. Schwartz has developed this model in which he's looking at values, and particularly he says, okay, let's see which kind of values are related to each other, and see if we can look at different aspects of different values, if we break them up into different dimensions and so forth. And so he has these two sets of opposing dimensions. These are kind of outlined in your textbook. And then good thing about values and attitudes is you can think about yourself. Think about yourself. When you do something, when you get up in the morning and start out to do something, what are you thinking about? Are you trying to, for example, help yourself? This dimension is called self-enhancement. All right? The opposite of that would be, are you more interested in helping society or helping others? Schwartz calls this self-transcendence. The other set of dimensions that Schwartz talks about are what he calls openness to change. Are you willing to consider new things? Right? Are you interested to see how the situation's changing? We might call this progressive. Are you more progressive, or are you more conservative? Are you more worried that things are changing too fast? Would you like to conserve things and keep things the way that they are? So with these two sets of dimensions, self-enhancement versus self-transcendence, and openness to change versus conservation, we have 10 different values. All right? Achievement, power, hedonism, all these are part of self-enhancement. Security. Notice as we go around through here, these two are somewhat related. In fact, that's one of the points of the model, is that two that happen to be side by side on the model are more related than if they're opposite sides of the model. We have conformity and tradition. We have benevolence. We have universalism. We have self-direction. We have stimulation. And then we're back to hedonism again. So going back to what we talked about earlier, you can see as you're thinking about these 10 values, they're motivational. You get out of bed in the morning, what are you going to do? Are you motivated by achievement? Are you motivated by power? Are you motivated by security? Do you wish to be in a situation where you can maybe preserve the situation as it is? Are you interested in helping others? Are you interested in self-direction, stimulation, etc.? So you can see that these values are motivational. Bipolar, that means the ones that are opposite from each other are incongruent. That means that they're kind of opposed, while adjacent values are going to be more complementary. So what are the implications of Schwartz's value theory? Well, in terms of workplace application, as it says here, if we understand what workers value, if we understand why they get out of bed in the morning, what it is they hope to achieve in their personal lives, we're more likely, we can do a better job of tapping into their motivation. Helping them to achieve their goals would help you to achieve the goals of the organization. If you push employees to do things that they don't value, this is going to cause problems. Unless you're able to better align the values of your employees with the goals of the organization, you're not going to have a good outcome. Personal application. Well, think about yourself. I know a lot of us are feeling burned out right now. We talked about that. I talked about that last time in our first discussion, our first graded discussion. Like I said before, I think that we are undergoing a major shift in values, including you, including me. I think we're undergoing a shift in values. There are things that are happening right now. You may have heard of the YOLO economy, YOLO. I think a lot of people are thinking about what's happening in this pandemic right now and saying, you only live once, YOLO. And so this is causing people to quit their jobs and do things that maybe they had really wanted to do. I'm hoping this is going to be a good thing. I'm trying to remain hopeful that this great resignation is going to be a good thing. It's causing people to demand more money for some of the things they were doing before. Hey, there's nothing wrong with getting what you're worth, right? So moving right along, what do we know about values? In general, people's values are stable over time, but values vary across generations and cultures. Think about your grandparents' generation. Think about the values that your grandparents have versus the values that your friends have, or for those older students, that your children have. Think about your parents' values versus your children's values. I know that some of our classmates have children. Attracting employees whose personal values align with those of the organization yields better benefits. You have lower employee turnover, which correlates with higher employee retention, higher engagement, and higher customer satisfaction. Personal attitudes, very much related to values. As I'm going through these, think about something. Think about, think about a particular politician, or think about a particular situation that's going on at work right now. We have different components, all right? We have the affective component. Affective usually means feel, has to do with emotion, okay? I feel this. When you think about a particular politician, do you think, for example, good thoughts or bad thoughts? There's a cognitive component. I think. Do you think? Do you rational? The cognitive component is more rational. Going through a reasoning process, what are your thoughts about this particular thing? And then finally, there's a behavioral component, which is, as you might guess, it's more action-oriented. What are you going to do about it? If you feel and think a certain way about a particular thing, final component is behavioral. How is this going to call? And like I said before, personal attitudes and values are changing as a result of technological changes, as a result of the way that technology is affecting our lives, the way that we're getting our information, the way that we're living our lives is causing our personal attitudes and values to change. And also this pandemic. Again, this pandemic has, I was just reading an article in the paper yesterday that, of course, the pandemic it's 2 years now, and no one could have imagined 2 years ago how much this pandemic would be affecting our lives in many, many ways. And this kind of a drastic change in our lives can't help but affect our values. And I'm going to talk more about some of these other things later, and this will be part of our discussion questions for later on. And another term that you may have heard of is called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you experience psychological discomfort. Whenever you're holding two or more conflicting cognitions. In other words, doing something that you don't agree with, for example. Let's suppose that you're working for a tobacco company, all right? And in working for this tobacco company, you're trying to figure out new ways of marketing and selling cigarettes to new customers. And while this might be a well-paying job, at the same time you realize that, hey, I might be actually ruining someone's health. Now, if you're a normal, psychologically healthy person, you're likely to experience cognitive dissonance in that situation. That is a little bit of a conflict, a little bit of a feeling of, not so good going on back there. How might you deal with that? Well, again, a normal, psychologically healthy person doesn't like that feeling. Is going to try to get rid of that that cognitive dissonance by changing their attitudes, behaviors, or both. That is, quit your job, for example. While this job pays well, I don't like the fact that I may be ruining people's health, and so I'm going to quit this job and do something that better aligns with my values. You might belittle the importance of the inconsistent behavior. Well, people should have freedom to choose. It's up to them. I'm not really forcing them to buy my product. It's their choice. It's not going to harm that many people. People enjoy smoking in some ways, so yeah, you can try to belittle the importance of the inconsistent behavior, or you can find consonant elements that outweigh the dissonance ones. Well, that may be true, all right? Let's suppose that you're getting a big salary and you're selling these products that you believe are harmful, but you're donating a big chunk of your money to cancer research or to your church or something else. This is not so great, but I'm making up for it over here. Another model that we're going to talk about is Adjun's, I'm not even exactly sure how you pronounce this name, Adjun's theory of planned behavior. And notice here that we have a behavior. Let's suppose this behavior is giving blood. This is the one that your textbook talks about. Let's suppose that there's a national blood shortage. You realize that Red Cross blood banks around the country right now are very short of blood, which in fact they are. They're very, very short of blood. There's a national blood shortage emergency. And so, how do you feel about that? What's your own personal attitude towards that? Does that make you feel concerned? Do you feel that it would be helpful if you could give blood? Do you have a strong feeling? Even me mentioning this right now, how do you feel about that? If I tell you that there's this very serious judge shortage right now, how do you feel about that? Then, the subjective norm here means societal, sociological term. How does society feel about that? I mean, if you were to give blood, would the people whose opinions you value, your family and friends, would they look up to that behavior? Would they look down on that behavior? Would they say, "Why are you doing that? You don't get anything out of it. It's a waste of your time." Or would they say, that's important right now because people are dying and people's health is being affected, and so by giving blood you may save a life. And then there's the perceived behavioral control. Well, is there a blood drive in my little town? Do I have to drive all the way to Charleston from Pinch or East Bank in order to get there? Is my car working? Is it snowy? Is there something that prevents me from doing it? But all of these things together, your own personal feeling, your own personal values, society's norms regarding the behavior, and just the controls, the factors that might stand in your way, all of these are going to affect your intention. And as your intention becomes stronger, you're more likely to do the behavior. Next thing we're going to talk about are key workplace attitudes. These key workplace attitudes have shown up over time through research. Remember in my last video I talked about how professors, people like myself, are actually researchers. We spend a lot of time collecting data, doing experiments, examining field study, going in and doing surveys and so forth. And over time, in doing that research, professors and researchers have come up with 4 pretty important key workplace attitudes. These are, number 1, organizational commitment. Number 2, employee engagement. Number 3, organizational support. And number 4, job satisfaction. So let's talk a little bit about each of these in more detail. First one is organizational commitment. It's defined as the extent to which an employee identifies with organizations and is committed to its goals. And it leads to greater employee retention, greater motivation in pursuit of organizational goals. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to talk about my own personal situation. I identify with the goals of West Virginia State University. Why? Well, this is my hometown, right? I've gone out and seen lots of parts of the world, but I've come back. I feel like West Virginia State University helped me a lot back when I was first starting out. I was the first one in my family to actually go to college. My mother and father, and either one of them had a college education, and so West Virginia State College really helped me in a lot of ways. And so I think that by having this commitment, this alignment of my goals with West Virginia State University, it makes it more likely for me to stay, even though, let's face it, the pay is not all that great. And I want to do everything I can to try to help the university succeed in its mission. And I'd like to try to, this alignment, this organizational commitment, it relieves my cognitive dissonance, you might say. Next one, employee engagement. Employee engagement is kind of a newer one. I think employee engagement, when I say newer, I'm talking about in the span of my lifetime, which I've been around a long time and seen lots of things happen. Employee engagement is, 20 years old, 15, 20 years old, and it kind of comes along with this idea of mindfulness. Mindfulness and employee engagement, I believe, are somewhat related. Mindfulness, you may have heard of mindfulness. That is being in the moment. And employee engagement is kind of like being in the moment while you're on the job. And I'm sure you can think of yourself, or you can think of other people you know, that when they go into work, they tune out. They shut themselves off, go into robot mode, and they just, like an automaton, they go through the motions of doing their job. Employee engagement is just the opposite of that. It means you're actually there, thinking about your job. You're there, you're present in the present moment while your job's taking place. It includes feelings of urgency, being focused, intensity, and enthusiasm. Another one, increased employee engagement has been linked to, you might have guessed it, increased loyalty and satisfaction, increased employee performance, increased employee well-being, and greater financial performance for the organization. Another one is perceived organizational support. Perceived organizational support is, well, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Do you believe on your job that the organization values your contribution, genuinely cares about your well-being? If you do, you're more likely to have increased organizational commitment, increased job satisfaction, increased organizational citizenship behavior, increased performance of your tasks, and you're less likely to leave your job. It's associated with lower turnover for the organization as a whole. The last one is job satisfaction. Are you satisfied with your job? Job satisfaction is an affective. Remember, we said affective really relates to emotional or feeling. An affective or emotional response toward various facets of one's jobs. In other words, it's the extent to which an individual likes his or her job. Satisfied with your job. If you're more satisfied with your job, you're more likely to experience organizational citizenship behavior. When I was doing my PhD at the University of Connecticut in the 1990s, in the late 1990s, I had a classmate who was also doing her PhD, and I remember that her dissertation examined organizational citizenship behavior. Was one of the things that she was studying. And this represents discretionary individual behaviors that go above and beyond the call of duty you might think about. A good citizen of the organization, a good citizen will do things that are typically not directly or explicitly recognized by the formal reward system, even though the organization doesn't reward this, they do it anyway, and can, in the aggregate, promote effective functioning of the organization. Another interesting thing about OCB, organizational citizenship behavior, is that it reduces turnover. Turnover is very important in organizations right now. I've mentioned a couple times the Great Resignation. We see that people are quitting their jobs in record numbers. But job satisfaction to reduce voluntary turnover, hire people who fit with the organization's culture, spend time fostering employee engagement, provide effective onboarding and socialization for new employees, and recognize and reward high performing employees. All right then, so that wraps up this topic. We are going to stay at the individual level for our next topic, individual differences and emotion, which is going to be next week. In the meantime, hope everything is going great in your world. Stay great out there, guys. Take it easy.